My name is Karen Mitchell. I'm 48 years old, and I've been a single mom for most of my daughter's life. Her name is Madison, though everyone calls her Maddie. She's 20 now, in college, and trying to find her own place in the world. I've done everything I could to make sure she had a good life. Sometimes that meant working 2 jobs, skipping out on things I wanted for myself, or staying up late to make sure she got where she needed to be. When Maddie was younger, we were close. She used to crawl into my bed when she had nightmares. She used to draw me pictures and say she wanted to grow up to be just like me. Somewhere along the line, that little girl slipped away, and in her place is someone I hardly recognize. These days she barely calls unless she needs money. When I ask how she's doing, she shrugs me off. When I try to give advice, she rolls her eyes. I know kids grow up and push boundaries. I expected a little rebellion, but what I didn't expect was the coldness. The way she looks at me like I'm just a problem standing in her way. The way she mocks my words as if nothing I say has value. It all came to a head one evening when she came by the house. I wanted to talk about something practical, something I thought was fair. I've been paying her car insurance every month, $300 that comes straight out of my paycheck. I asked her if she could start pitching in a little, or at least show some appreciation for what I've been doing. I wasn't asking for the world, just a little respect and responsibility. She laughed. Not a nervous laugh, not a playful one. She laughed in my face like what I said was the dumbest thing she'd ever heard. Then she said, "You're my mom. It's literally your job. Don't act like I owe you anything." In that moment, something inside me cracked. I stood there, staring at this young woman I raised, and all I could think about were the nights I went without sleep so she could make it to her basketball tournaments, the vacations I never took because I was paying for her car, the countless sacrifices I made that she never even noticed. To her, it all meant nothing. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I just smiled and let the conversation end. But deep down, a decision had already formed. If she wanted to treat me like I was nothing more than a bank, then maybe it was time to remind her that banks can close their doors. That night, after she left, I sat down with my phone, took a deep breath, and called the insurance company. When Maddie first left for college, I thought things would be hard because I'd miss her. What I didn't expect was how quickly the distance would change the way she treated me. At first, she'd call once or twice a week, just to check in or tell me about her classes. But before long, those calls stopped being about sharing her life and became about asking for something: gas money, grocery money, rent money. If I didn't answer fast enough, she'd follow with a short text that made me feel like a walking ATM. When I tried reaching out just to ask how she was doing, my messages were met with one-word replies or worse, silence. If I pressed, she would say she was busy or too tired to talk. I reminded myself she was growing up, juggling school and work, but the coldness stung more than I wanted to admit. It wasn't that she was too busy, it was that she didn't care to make time for me anymore. The hardest part wasn't the money or the silence, though. It was the way she started mocking me. When I offered advice, she smirked and said things like, "Okay, Mom, sure," in a tone that felt less like listening and more like ridicule. My words used to matter to her, but now they seemed to amuse her in a cruel way. One evening I thought maybe things were turning around. She invited me to dinner with her and 2 of her college friends at a little place near campus. I dressed nicely, excited to meet them, hoping to feel included in her world. For the first half hour, I sat there trying to join in their conversation, asking questions about their classes, their favorite professors, even just how campus life was going. Every time I spoke, Maddie rolled her eyes or laughed under her breath like I was embarrassing her just by existing. At one point, I made a light comment about how they must be spending more money on coffee than textbooks. Her friends chuckled politely, but Maddie sighed dramatically and said, "God, Mom, you don't get it." She leaned back in her chair, rolling her eyes so hard it was like she wanted the whole restaurant to see. In that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt with her before: humiliation. My cheeks burned, and I pretended to sip my water just so no one would notice how much it hurt. These were the same eyes that used to look at me with admiration, and now they dismissed me like I was nothing. The rest of the dinner dragged on, but I barely tasted my food. I smiled when I had to, nodded when they spoke, but inside, all I could think about was how quickly respect had evaporated. I had given her everything I could, and here I was, sitting across from my own daughter, being treated like an inconvenience she had to tolerate. I decided it was time to have a real conversation with Maddie, one that couldn't be brushed off with eye rolls or half smile. She came over one afternoon, and instead of letting her rush out the door like usual, I asked her to sit down at the kitchen table. I had been carrying the weight of this talk for weeks, rehearsing the words in my head, trying to balance honesty with patience. The subject wasn't complicated. I'd been covering her car insurance every month. $300, taken directly out of my paycheck, like clockwork. It was one of the last big expenses I'd continued to handle for her after she moved out. I told myself it was for her safety, so she wouldn't risk driving without coverage, but deep down I also knew it was one more way I was holding on, one more link to keep me connected to her. As she sat across from me, scrolling on her phone, I explained what I needed. I said it was getting harder for me to keep paying the full amount. I wasn't asking her to cover all of it. I just wanted her to contribute something. Or, if nothing else, to show some acknowledgement of the effort I was putting in. It wasn't about the dollars as much as it was about respect. She didn't look up at first, and when she finally did, there was no trace of seriousness on her face. Instead, she smirked like I had just told her a joke. Then came the sound that still echoes in my chest. She laughed. Not kindly, not nervously, but sharply, right in my face. "You're my mom," she said, almost sneering. "It's literally your job. Don't act like I owe you anything." I sat frozen, staring at her, and the room seemed to go silent. That single sentence cut through me more than any argument we'd ever had. I thought about the long hours I'd spent working overtime, the careful budgeting to make sure every bill got paid, the countless sacrifices that had gone into making sure she could have a car to drive in the first place. And yet, to her, it was nothing more than a job I was obligated to do. Something inside me shifted in that instant. It wasn't just disappointment, it was a realization. The girl I had poured everything into no longer saw me as a person. She saw me as a resource, something she was entitled to use. Her laughter didn't just sting, it hollowed me out. I didn't argue back. I didn't raise my voice. I simply nodded, let her finish what she had to say, and watched her walk out the door like it was just another afternoon. But the moment the door closed, I knew things had changed. What broke inside me wasn't just hurt. It was the last thread holding me back from doing what I should have done a long time ago. A few days after that awful talk, I was at my sister Diane's house. We were having coffee in her kitchen when her daughter Emily came in. Emily is close to Maddie, almost like a sister. She hesitated for a moment, then asked if she could tell me something. The look on her face warned me it wouldn't be easy to hear. Emily said she and Maddie had been hanging out recently, just talking about school and life, when the subject of money came. Maddie had been joking around, bragging about how she never really had to worry about bills. She told Emily, in a loud, almost proud tone, that she could push me as far as she wanted, and I'd never do anything about it. "Mom's too soft to ever cut me off," Emily repeated, her voice heavy with guilt for even telling me. I sat there, my cup cooling in my hands, feeling like someone had knocked the air out of me. It wasn't just the words, it was the confidence behind them. Maddie wasn't only dismissing me in private, she was turning my sacrifices into a punchline. The sting wasn't just about money. It was the way she talked about me to other people, as if my care and support were signs of weakness. My kindness had become something she mocked, not appreciated. She didn't just ignore what I did for her, she used it to prove how much power she thought she had over me. I could picture her saying it, laughing like it was the most obvious thing in the world, expecting Emily to agree with her. The humiliation sank deep. All those years I'd spent believing I was teaching her love and gratitude, and instead, she was teaching others that her own mother was a fool. Emily looked like she wanted to take it back, like she regretted telling me. But it was too late. The words were already burning in my chest. I forced a smile and told her I appreciated her honesty. Inside, though, I felt a different kind of pain, heavier than anything before. It's one thing to be disrespected to your face. It's another to know you're being laughed at when you're not around. That realization hit harder than any argument Maddie and I had ever had. On the drive home, I couldn't shake it. Every mile I put behind me just gave me more time to replay those words. Too soft. Never cut her off. The truth was she believed it. She thought I'd never take a stand, never make her face consequences. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the humiliation had hardened into something else. It wasn't just sadness anymore. It was a quiet, sharp determination building under the weight of all the years I had let things slide. That night, lying awake in my bed, memories began flooding in like a film I couldn't pause. I saw myself behind the wheel of my old minivan, driving Maddie back and forth to basketball practices, sometimes 3 times in a single day when there were scrimmages. I remembered how I'd sit in the parking lot with a thermos of coffee, waiting for her, too tired to even read a book, but unwilling to complain. She'd come out sweaty and smiling, and I'd clap like she'd just won the championship, even if it was only a practice drill. Then I thought about the extra shifts I picked up at work, pushing through long nights at the office while my feet ached, just so I could make the payments on her first car. That car wasn't fancy, but it was hers. I wanted her to feel freedom, to feel proud. I gave up weekends, took side jobs, and even pawned an old necklace once when money got tight. I told myself it was worth it if it kept her moving forward. I remembered standing in store aisles with clothes in my hand, shirts I liked, shoes I needed, only to put them back on the rack. Instead, I'd head to the children's section, buying her uniforms, sneakers, or whatever else she needed at the time. My closet stayed the same for years, while hers grew with every season. It never bothered me then. I thought sacrifice was just another word for love. But now, as I stared at the ceiling, one image replayed itself louder than all the rest, her laughing in my face. That sharp sound, the curl of her lip, the way her eyes dared me to push back. The more I thought about it, the more it hollowed me out. It wasn't just disrespect, it was dismissal, as if everything I had done for her was invisible. The words she threw at me that day were cruel, but it was the laugh that wouldn't let go. It circled in my head every time I closed my eyes. I realized that if I kept allowing her to treat me this way, I would lose myself entirely. She would never learn what it meant to give back, to honor the sacrifices made for her, if I continued to bend until there was nothing left of her. For years I believed love meant carrying the weight without complaint. But in that quiet moment, I finally understood that love also meant drawing lines. I couldn't let her take me for granted any longer. I had given her freedom, comfort, and stability. Now, I needed to give her something else, responsibility. I sat up in bed, the decision clear as day. The ache in my chest turned into resolve. She might see me as soft, but she was about to learn I wasn't someone who could be laughed off forever. The next morning, I made coffee like usual, but my hands didn't shake the way they normally did when I was upset. Instead, they were steady, almost too calm. I sat at the table with my phone in front of me, staring at the number scribbled on a slip of paper from the insurance company. My heart beat slow and even like it already knew what I was about to do. I dialed. A cheerful voice answered, asking how they could help. I explained I wanted to cancel a policy. Saying it out loud gave me a strange rush, like stepping into cold water. The representative asked for the account details, verified my identity, and then confirmed the request. Within minutes, the coverage was gone. No arguments, no resistance. Just a click of keys on their end, and something I had carried for years vanished. When the call ended, I set the phone down and leaned back in my chair. For a moment, a pang of guilt pressed against me. I thought of Maddie getting in her car, believing everything was the same, completely unaware of what I'd done. Part of me wondered if I'd crossed a line, if I was being cruel instead of firm. But then another part of me stirred, something deeper, sharper. For once, I had acted for myself, not for her. The weight that had been sitting on my chest for weeks loosened. I wasn't helpless anymore. I had taken control of something that had been used against me. It wasn't about punishing her as much as it was about reclaiming my own dignity. I didn't text her, didn't call, didn't give any warning. I went about my day as though nothing had changed. I folded laundry, washed dishes, even ran errands. Every so often, the thought would creep back. She has no idea yet. It gave me an odd satisfaction, knowing the moment of truth was waiting just around the corner. There were flashes of unease too. I imagined her reaction, anger, tears, maybe even hatred. I pictured her stranded somewhere, phoning me in a panic. My chest tightened at the thought, but I reminded myself she was an adult now. She needed to understand that support was not owed, that actions had consequences. As evening fell, I poured myself another cup of coffee and sat by the window. The guilt and satisfaction twisted together, a knot of emotions I couldn't quite untangle. But beneath it all, a quiet strength settled in me. For the first time in years, I wasn't just absorbing her disrespect. I had drawn a line, and whether Maddie liked it or not, she was going to feel it. I didn't know when the moment would come, but I knew it was coming. And when it did, there would be no going back. The phone rang just after sunrise. I saw Maddie's name flashing across the screen, and for a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail. But something in me said to answer. The second I picked up, her voice came barreling through the speaker, shrill and frantic. "Do you have any idea what just happened?" she screamed. "I got pulled over on my way to work. The cop said my insurance was canceled. Do you know how embarrassing that was? Do you know how dangerous that is? You just ruined my life." Her words came rapid fire, full of fury and panic. She wasn't crying, not yet, but the edge in her tone told me she was close. In the background, I could hear traffic, the sound of cars whipping past, her breath uneven as she tried to process what had just happened. I held the phone steady, listening without interruption. Every insult she threw at me, every accusation, slid past like rain on glass. I had expected this moment. I had prepared for it. "You can't just do that," she shouted. "What am I supposed to do now? I could lose my job if I can't drive. Do you even care what happens to me?" For a long second, I didn't say a word. I let the silence stretch, let her feel it. Then, in a calm, measured voice, I answered. "Maybe now," I said softly, "you'll understand what respect costs." On the other end, there was a pause. Just a beat of quiet, enough to let the weight of my words land. Then she exploded again, louder than before, insisting I had betrayed her, insisting I was heartless. But beneath the rage, I caught something else in her tone, fear. I didn't argue. I didn't try to explain. I let her rant, her voice rising and falling, until she finally hung up on me. The call ended with a sharp click, but the silence that followed wasn't empty. It was filled with the sound of a shift, a change I could almost feel in my bone. I set the phone down on the counter and exhaled. My hands weren't shaking. My heart wasn't racing. I felt steady, grounded, as if I had finally taken back control of something that had been slipping through my fingers for too long. The day stretched ahead of me, quiet and ordinary. I went about my tasks with a strange lightness, knowing she was out there facing a reality she had never considered before. No coverage, no safety net, no easy fix. For once, Maddie was learning a lesson not through lectures or reminders, but through the sting of consequence. And though her words still echoed, cruel and loud, I knew the silence I had given her carried far more weight than any argument ever could. The days after that phone call stretched into weeks. My phone stayed quiet. No messages, no calls, not even a half-hearted need money text from Maddie. The silence was loud but not surprising. She had always used distance as a weapon when she didn't get her way. This time, though, I refused to chase after her. At first, it almost felt peaceful. I could cook dinner without waiting for a knock at the door and a request for gas money. I could check my bank account without bracing myself for the next expense. For the first time in years, I wasn't bracing for her demands. But underneath that calm, there was a heavy ache. She was my daughter, and no matter how much anger I carried, the gap between us hurt. It didn't take long for the rest of the family to notice. My sister Diane was the first to call. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Karen, what on earth were you thinking?" she asked, her tone sharp. "Canceling her insurance? You know how dangerous that is. She could have gotten in serious trouble." I listened quietly while she lectured me, her voice rising with every sentence. She thought I'd acted out of spite, that I'd been reckless, that I'd let my pride get in the way of Maddie's well-being. When she finally paused for breath, I simply said, "I've been carrying her for too long, Diane." Something had to give. But Diane didn't understand. None of them did. A cousin even reached out, suggesting I apologize before things got worse. To them, I was the villain in the story, too harsh, too unyielding. They hadn't seen the way Maddie looked at me, the way she laughed like my sacrifices were a joke. They hadn't heard her brag about how I'd never stand up to her. What they called cruelty, I called survival. I wasn't just a source of cash. I wasn't an endless supply of favors. I was a mother who deserved basic respect. Every time someone tried to guilt me, I held firm. I repeated the same words in my head. No more being laughed at. No more being treated like a wallet. It became a kind of shield, one I leaned on whenever doubt crept in. The house stayed quiet, but inside me, a strange strength began to grow. I didn't know how long the standoff with Maddie would last, but for once, I wasn't afraid of her silence. If she wanted space, she could have it. I wasn't going to beg for scraps of affection while she trampled over every ounce of respect I deserved. Let her stew. Let her rage. I wasn't going back to the woman who gave and gave, only to be mocked for. This time, the silence belonged to both of us, and I was ready to live with it. It was late in the evening when I heard the knock. At first, I thought it was a neighbor, but when I opened the door, Maddie was standing there. Her eyes were swollen, her hair a tangled mess, and her cheeks streaked with tears. She didn't storm in like usual. Instead, she stood small on the porch, clutching her jacket like it was the only thing holding her together. "I can't get to work," she said, her voice cracking. "If I miss any more shifts, they'll fire me." The words tumbled out in fragments, like she'd been holding them back until they spilled over. She explained how her friends couldn't keep giving her rides, how public buses didn't line up with her hours, how everything felt like it was falling apart. Each sentence sounded less like anger and more like desperation. I stepped aside, and she came in quietly, wiping at her face with her sleeve. For a moment, I almost reached out to hug her, the way I used to when she scraped her knee or had a bad dream. But I stopped myself. This wasn't the same little girl. This was a grown woman facing the weight of her own choices. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table. She couldn't look at me, just stared at her hands. My heart was heavy, but I stayed silent until she finally whispered, "Why would you do this to me?" That question unlocked everything I had been holding in. I told her about that afternoon in my kitchen, the moment she laughed at me like my words didn't matter. I reminded her of the exact sentence she threw at me, how she said I owed her, how she treated me like nothing more than a duty. Her head dropped lower. For the first time in years, she didn't argue, didn't roll her eyes, didn't deflect. She sat in the weight of my words, and I could see her shoulders trembling. When she finally lifted her face, there was no defiance left. Only shame. "I didn't think you'd ever stand up to me," she whispered. The honesty in her voice startled me more than anything else. The room went still. That one sentence said more than any apology could. She had taken me for granted because she truly believed I would never fight back. And in some ways, I had proved her right for too long. Tears welled in my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. Instead, I held her gaze, letting her see the strength she had ignored for so long. For the first time, she wasn't looking at someone she could push around. She was looking at a mother who had finally drawn a line. We sat in silence for a long time after those words left her mouth. The house felt heavier than usual, the kind of quiet that comes after a storm. Maddie fidgeted with her sleeves, waiting for me to say something. I could see the exhaustion in her face, the weight of sleepless nights, and the fear of losing what little stability she had left. My heart ached for her, but I knew I couldn't just slip back into old patterns. Finally, I leaned forward. "I'll help you," I said slowly, choosing each word with care. "But it won't be the way it was before." Her eyes flicked up, a glimmer of hope mixed with hesitation. I laid it out clearly. The insurance could be restarted, but only if she paid half. No more excuses, no more last-minute pleas. She was an adult, and adults share responsibility. I told her this wasn't just about money, it was about respect. If she ever mocked me again, if she treated me like I was nothing more than a paycheck, then she would be on her own for good. She opened her mouth like she wanted to argue, but the words caught in her throat. For once, she didn't push back. Instead, she nodded, reluctant but sincere, and whispered, "Okay." It wasn't the tearful apology part of me had hoped for, but it was something real. I could see the shift in her eyes, the slow realization that the rules had changed. I wasn't the pushover she had grown used to. I felt a strange mixture of relief and sadness. Relief that I had finally taken a stand, sadness that it had taken this much pain to reach her. I wanted to believe things could improve, that maybe this was the beginning of a different kind of relationship. But I also knew it wouldn't be easy. That night, after she left, I sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at the empty chair she had just occupied. I thought back on all the years of sacrifice, all the times I chose her needs over my own, and how quickly it had turned into entitlement. It hurt to admit, but unconditional giving had not taught her gratitude. It had taught her to expect more without offering anything in return. As the clock ticked past midnight, a calm settled over me. For the first time in years, I felt balanced. I wasn't cutting her out of my life, but I also wasn't willing to be trampled. This was a new chapter, one where boundaries would guide the relationship instead of blind sacrifice. Sometimes the hardest lesson isn't for the child, it's for the parent. I had to learn that love doesn't mean endless giving. Sometimes the only way to earn respect is to stop handing it out freely. And as bitter as that truth was, it finally gave me the strength to stand tall. Do you think I made the right choice by cutting off her insurance, or should I have handled it differently? Let me know in the comments. I'd love your thoughts. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this.